Welcome to the deep dive. So today our mission is to really get under the hood of one specific, really important research paper. Think of it as a key piece defining where we are with global ecology right now.
Exactly.
We're doing a full look at the Homogocene, a
Mm.
research prospectus for the study of biotic homogenization. Came out in 2018, lead author Julian D. Olden.
Yeah, and this paper is, well, it's critical because it pushes us past just counting extinctions, which is obviously catastrophic in itself.
Right.
But it makes us ask, okay, what are we actually replacing those unique native species with? It's not just loss, it's also replacement.
And that takes us, straight to the core idea here, biotic homogenization, or BH. You'll hear that a lot. Before we dig into the gaps in the research, maybe just give us the quick definition. What is homogenization in this context?
Okay, so fundamentally, it's when biological communities, the mix of plants and animals in different places start looking more and more alike over time. This tends to happen because you get these widespread, often non-native species, the ones that do really well in human-changed landscapes, kind of taking over from the unique local specialists that disappear. In ecology terms, we call that a drop in beta diversity.
Okay, so beta diversity. If I went for a walk here in North America and saw mostly the same birds or plants I saw last year in Europe, that shrinking difference between the two places, that's the loss of beta diversity.
That's it, exactly, yeah. The sort of local character gets diluted by this more globalized, generalist set of species. And the stakes are huge, which is right there in the title, the Homogocene.
Right. The Homogocene.
Yeah, the idea is that this double whammy, losing unique natives and gaining widespread non-natives, is basically kicking off a whole new geological era with massive ecological and evolutionary consequences down the line.
Wow. Okay, so Olden and the team, they decided to look back at, 2 decades of research to see how well we actually get this whole thing.
That's right. They wanted to really assess our comprehensive understanding globally. And what they found was, well, the idea of the Homogocene is talked about a lot. But measuring it, that's lagging way behind.
Okay, let's unpack that first. How well do we understand the scope of this flattening, you could call it? Is the data really there?
Well, no, not really. And this might be the paper's sort of most startling finding. They found this huge gap. The number of papers just talking about biotic homogenization is 7 times 7 times greater than the number of papers that actually give you quantitative estimates of how community similarity is changing.
7 times, wow. So we're basically kind of arguing about something we haven't properly measured across big parts of the world yet. That sounds like a fundamental issue for trying to make policy, right?
Right.
How do you fix what you can't measure properly?
It does suggest that, a lot of our understanding might be based more on sort of conceptual agreement than on hard ground-level data everywhere.
Yeah.
But that said, for the studies that did crunch the numbers, the trend seems pretty clear.
Oh.
Homogenization was reported more often than things staying the same, or even communities becoming more different. The odds ratio was about 1.6 across all the studies they looked at. So it is real, it is measurable, but our view of it is seriously distorted by some major biases in the research itself.
Right, the biases. Let's get into those because that really affects how much we can generalize, doesn't it? First up, geography. It's really skewed.
Oh, massively skewed, yeah. Nearly 3/4, 72% of all the research comes from the Northern Hemisphere.
72%.
Yep. Mostly the Palearctic, that's Europe and Northern Asia, making up 42%, and the Nearctic, which is North America, at 30%. So huge areas, the tropics, Africa, South America, Australia, they're really underrepresented in the data.
So if, almost 3/4 of the data is from relatively similar industrialized temperate zones, how can we confidently say this is a truly global thing? Isn't there a risk it's just reflecting where the researchers happen to be?
That's exactly the concern the paper raises. And it's not just geography. The taxonomic bias is just as bad, maybe worse.
Meaning which types of species get studied?
Exactly. The studies lean really heavily on terrestrial plants and freshwater fishes, probably because, well, they're relatively easier to survey consistently over time.
Okay.
But other really key groups think insects, mammals, even many bird groups. They're studied far, far less often in this context.
And you mentioned before almost no studies looking at different groups together, like plants and the insects that depend on them.
Yeah, that was really striking. They found, I think it was just 4 studies, that actually look at how homogenization in one group, say plants, might be affecting another group, like insects or birds, in the same place.
Wow.
And you need that, right? To understand a whole system, you've got to look at the interactions. So this lack of cross-taxonomic work really limits our ability to say anything general about the causes, and especially the consequences, of BH worldwide. The paper's first big recommendation is pretty simple. We have to start focusing research on these unstudied places and unstudied groups.
Okay, so shifting gears a bit into their specific propositions for what to do next. Proposition 2 is about looking at different scales, right? Both space and time. Why isn't just knowing the average change enough?
Well, because BH patterns, they're really sensitive to the scale you choose. If you look at a huge area, what ecologists call a coarse spatial grain, you're just statistically more likely to find the same common, widespread species everywhere within that area.
Right, makes sense.
So the paper points out that you kind of expect to see more homogenization at larger scales. We need to be really clear about the scale we're measuring at and understand how the mechanisms driving BH might differ between, say, a local pond and an entire region.
And the time scale is a big deal, too. You mentioned studies often just compare one point in the past to today, like 2 snapshots.
Yeah, exactly, just a before and after. And that really limits our ability to see how fast things are changing or if there are weird phases in between. You might completely miss transitory states.
Transitory state.
Yeah, like phases where things are changing in unexpected ways. They give this really cool example from France with bird communities.
Yeah.
He actually found a period where the bird communities first became more different from each other, that's differentiation, before they then showed really strong homogenization over the next couple of decades.
Yeah.
If you'd only looked at the start and the very end, you'd have totally missed that initial differentiation phase.
Huh. That's fascinating. It's not just a straight line down. Okay, so that dynamic nature, that leads us to Proposition 3, which is about getting better at how we quantify this stuff, really drilling down into what we're measuring when we talk about similarity.
Yes, exactly. And this is huge. Over 84% of the studies they looked at just used taxonomic identity, basically species names. Are the lists of species becoming more similar?
Which seems intuitive, but maybe too simple.
It's simple, but yeah, it's limited. The paper argues we really need to push into measuring functional homogenization. Are the roles species play or their traits becoming more similar? And also phylogenetic homogenization, looking at the evolutionary relatedness of the species and communities.
Okay, let's make that concrete. So, functional. Like maybe you lose a very specialized native tree that provides unique food, and it gets replaced by 2 different non-native shrubs. Taxonomically, the species list changed, maybe richness even went up locally.
Yeah.
But functionally, if both those shrubs are just, say, fast-growing ground cover that lots of generalist animals eat, the function of that patch of forest has become simpler, more homogenized.
That's a perfect example.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that kind of functional convergence, it can really weaken an ecosystem, make it less able to cope with droughts or diseases, that kind of thing. And then there's the issue with the math, the indices people use.
Like Jacquard or Sorensen. I remember those from ecology class.
Yeah, those are common ones. They measure overall similarity. But the authors point out they're kind of blunt instruments. They can't easily tell you why things are becoming more similar. Is it because unique species are just disappearing, which we call nestedness? Or is it because one set of species is actively replacing another, which we call turnover?
Okay, hang on. Nestedness versus turnover. Can you break that down quickly?
Sure. So think of nestedness as subtraction. The communities with the most unique species are just losing those specialists, leaving behind only the common species found everywhere else. It's like a set of Russian dolls with the smallest, most common set inside all the others.
Got it. Species lost from diverse sites.
Right. Turnover is more like substitution. One distinct set of species is swapped out for another distinct set, maybe a set of non-native generalists pushing out native specialists. The metrics we use really need to help us distinguish if we're seeing mostly loss or mostly replacement or some combination.
Okay, that makes sense. It's interesting, though, because despite how serious this sounds, the paper notes that the actual measured changes often seem, well, kind of small. They mention things like a 1.3% increase in similarity for Canadian fish or 2.8% for Dutch birds.
Yeah, those numbers on the round, they don't sound huge, do they? But think of it like compound interest, maybe in reverse. A couple of percent change might not seem like much year to year or even or a decade. But over multiple decades, that slow, steady creep of increasing similarity really adds up. It's this gradual erosion of what makes places unique.
Right. A slow burn.
Exactly. And Proposition 4 pushes us to look much deeper into what's causing that erosion. Because early research often just looked at, say, a correlation with urbanization, more cities, more homogenization.
But it's obviously more complex than just cities causing everything.
Oh, way more complex. The paper details how research now needs to move beyond simple correlations and really investigate specific drivers. Things like logging and forest fragmentation. They cite examples from Brazil's Atlantic forests, or how dams are homogenizing fish communities in Australia.
Okay.
And even climate change. Things like warming spring temperatures seem to be driving functional homogenization in bird communities in the Czech Republic. It's a whole suite of interacting pressures.
And it's also crucial to remember, like you hinted at earlier, it's not just about non-native species invading, right? Native species can play a role too.
Absolutely. Sometimes native species themselves become superabundant generalists, maybe because of landscape changes or climate shifts, and they can end up dominating communities and reducing diversity too.
Yeah.
Natural environmental changes can also drive similarity.
Mm,
It's complicated.
it really is.
But that complexity, that's why policy needs to be nuanced. And there is actually a glimmer of hope mentioned. They cite some evidence from Europe where homogenization seems to have slowed down or even partially reversed for some groups, like plants and birds, in recent decades.
Oh, really? Why?
It seems to be linked to a slowdown in the rate of converting land to cropland. So it suggests that if you tackle specific drivers like land use change, you can potentially slow or reverse homogenization, at least locally.
That's encouraging. Okay, which leads us neatly into Proposition 5, the conservation side of things. If the main goal is preserving biodiversity, how does measuring beta diversity, the similarity between sites, actually help with conservation planning?
Yeah, this is a really important point the paper makes. BH is all about beta diversity, the differences between places. But a lot of traditional conservation focuses on alpha diversity, which is just how many species are in one spot, and gamma diversity, the total number of species in a whole region.
Right.
So just knowing that two sites are becoming more similar, the BH measure itself, isn't automatically enough to tell you the best conservation action. Maybe both sites are still really valuable, just less different from each other. Maximizing difference isn't always the same as maximizing overall biodiversity.
That makes sense. You want to protect unique places, sure, but maybe also just places with lots of species, even if they're similar to somewhere else.
Exactly. But the paper argues BH can be a really useful tool for monitoring conservation networks over time, to check if your network of parks or reserves is actually maintaining that regional diversity, that complementarity, ensuring that different sites continue to hold unique combinations of species.
Okay, so it's a monitoring tool for the network's effectiveness.
Potentially, yeah. And again, that big gap, we talked about the lack of studies on functional and phylogenetic homogenization that really hampers our understanding of the conservation consequences. If ecosystems are becoming functionally simpler, even if species numbers hold up, they might be way less resilient to future shocks like climate change or new diseases. They lose that landscape-level buffering capacity.
Right. If all the ecosystems start doing the same basic things, they might all fail together when something big hits.
That's the worry.
Okay, so if figuring out the past and present is this tricky with all the gaps and biases, I can only imagine forecasting the future is even harder. Which brings us to the last big challenge, Proposition 6. Trying to provide reliable scenarios for what happens next with homogenization.
Yeah, reliable is the key word there. The authors really caution against the simple approaches people sometimes use. Like just assuming all the currently endangered species will go extinct and all the non-native species currently spreading will successfully establish everywhere.
Why is that flawed? Seems like a worst-case scenario baseline.
It seems logical, but it's too simplistic. Because extinctions and invasions aren't just simple arithmetic. They happen because of complex interactions, synergies between different human pressures, climate change, habitat loss, pollution, invasive species. They all interact in unpredictable ways.
Okay, so we need models that can actually handle that messiness, that complexity, and work even where we don't have perfect data.
Exactly. The paper calls for much more flexible modeling approaches. Things like community-level models that can incorporate rare species, which often get left out, and also trait-based models, which can help predict how functional diversity might change, especially in regions where we just don't have detailed species lists going back decades.
So integrating ecology, evolution, conservation across all these different scales, it's a tall order.
It is. But that's what they argue is needed to really get a handle on forecasting the Homogocene.
Well, this paper really does feel like a crucial roadmap then. For the listener, I guess the core takeaway is, yes, biotic homogenization is real, it's measurable, and it's happening. But our current understanding is pretty heavily skewed geographically and taxonomically, and we desperately need better ways to measure it, especially functionally And much smarter models to predict where it's all heading.
Absolutely. And, to bring it back down to earth a bit, the paper itself makes this really quite poignant comparison. It likens the ecological homogocene to the loss of cultural distinctiveness that many people feel is happening globally.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, they talk about, the spread of the same fast food chains everywhere, replacing local restaurants, or big multinational retailers pushing out unique local businesses, or even regional languages fading away in favor of dominant global languages. This sort of flattening of the ecological world, they suggest, has parallels in the flattening of the cultural world.
Oh, yeah, that does hit home. Losing diversity, whether it's species or cultures, you're losing identity, uniqueness.
It really resonates, doesn't it? And it leads to the final sort of provocative thought the paper leaves us with. It basically asks us to chew on this idea of the geography of nowhere.
The geography of nowhere.
Yeah. If our natural world, through this process of homogenization, becomes increasingly uniform, ecologically bland, you might say,
Yeah.
what's the ultimate cost to the human experience?
Hmm.
If forests in Brazil start to feel functionally similar to forests in Canada, if the birdsong starts to sound the same everywhere, what does that loss of natural distinction mean for our connection to bees, for our own sense of wonder? It's really something to think about.